this is the kind of interaction that brought us to Second Church in the first place. Your open-minded approach and dealing with really challenging questions like we are today. I actually was born here in Roanoke and grew up here. Lived right over on Bel Air Circle. My father was an architect. I think designed the 707 building or something. And I went to Salem Presbyterian Church. My father was an elder. My mother played the organ and some of the time. And I was very active in the youth group. And then Nancy and I, my wife, were the first students to go all the way through the new Cave Spring High School, and we graduated from 8th to 12th grade, and we graduated in 1961. I went to Davidson College and to UVA Medical School, and two really life-changing things happened in medical school. The first was I married my high school sweetheart, Nancy. It was 59 years now, wow. Almost 60. And then after my third year, we had a free summer, and I took a long shot and applied for this SmithKline French thing to go overseas and work. And I had never been on an airplane before. And we had another great option to go and work on the Navajo Nation hospital in Arizona. But we put in for this. It was a long shot. I almost didn't do it, to go to the Congo. And lo and behold, we got it. And then Westminster Presbyterian Church, where we were very active in Charlottesville, passed the hat for Nancy to go as well. So we went. We wouldn't have gone otherwise because we were living on her salary. And so that turns out to have been a real life-changing experience that we've never recovered from. As I say, I'd not been on an airplane before, so you can imagine a Roanoke kid coming back to Roanoke to head all the way to the central Congo Kasai province. So there were several experiences there and stories about how that changed us. From there, we went to Boston, moved to Boston, where I did my internship and residency in internal medicine at the old Harvard Medical Service at Boston City Hospital. From there, I was in the public health service. Luckily, in the Vietnam era, I wanted to serve my country. I just didn't want to patch up people shooting at each other again. But very luckily, was able to go and work on cholera in what was then East Pakistan. That fall, the historic greatest cyclone disaster in history occurred. And that spring is when the War of Independence for Bangladesh erupted, and we got evacuated. Actually, it was to Iran, to the infamous U.S. embassy there, before we finally got back and was able to finish my public health service time working at Hopkins in Baltimore. After which we moved to Charlottesville, where I was on faculty for 50 years in infectious diseases and global health. We actually founded what I think is probably was the first truly trans-university center for global health, bridging all the other schools across the University of Virginia, dealing with global health, engaging in mentored student projects that were anywhere that there were people in need, whether it was in Bangladesh or South Africa or Brazil or wherever, or down the road a long ways from Roanoke to Appalachia. And that's proven to be a really exciting thing. It was in May that we moved here because our daughter, who'd grown up in Charlottesville, but she and her husband and two kids at the time and are all here in Roanoke and still are. And so we moved here for that reason and came to Second Pres because of the wonderfully open-minded approach and incredible leadership and depth of your and Elizabeth's and Lynn's sermons and messages, and frankly, just wrestling with some really tough questions like you're doing today. So thanks. Well, I certainly struggle with the relationship between science and religion. And as someone who spent a career in both clinical and laboratory science, medicine, both in this country and in a number of countries abroad with collaborators and colleagues who are fantastic in different cultures, which is a learning experience, obviously, like few others. But the dichotomy between science and religion has really been written about. And yes, I've wrestled very hard with that one. There's a writer, Stephen Jay Gould or something, who has written a book, Rock of Ages, Religion and Science, in which he describes religion and science as totally non-overlapping magisteria. But the point is, they're totally different spheres of inquiry. And so science's job is to make empiric observations and to develop theories on the basis of that. And religion's job, in his viewpoint, I find interesting because he said, obviously, religion's spheres of inquiry are about purpose, meaning, moral values. And so he feels very strongly, Gould does, that these must be non-overlapping. You must respect the other as different. But I would actually go further to say that, however, even though either alone can be horrific, the church burning heretics at the stake or the Crusades are, far more pain and suffering have been caused by a feeling of certainty, when they come back to, than anything. They need to be respectful of the other. Equally, science that gets arrogant enough to start thinking that they understand ultimate purpose and reality is out of its league. They need to respect that other sphere of influence, inquiry. However, those where I would go farther is that either alone is horrific. Therefore, each must respect and address the other and appreciate the other, because religion without science is terrible. Science without a moral compass is, Hitlerian experimentation. I mean, horrible, horrible. It can be horrific. Atomic power. And there are many things where science, and that's becoming increasingly important as technology soars ahead. So I just think that keeping them separate, but in acknowledgement and interacting with the other is, I would argue, even more than just kind of a nice thing to do. If we don't do that, we've had it. I think that's the way we may found ourselves extinct. And so I just think that that's a terribly important dichotomy and bridge. Certainty is an overrated value. We have and we cause more pain and suffering because we are so convinced that we are right all the time. And our calling is not to be right, but is to be loving. And so that's, I think, the indictment of both of those magisteria, those spheres of science and religion. There's a whole lot more we don't know than what we do. And that's as a parent, with big bang things we may talk about another day, as it is in understanding where heaven is. And so I agree with you entirely. They've got to be respectful of and appreciative of the difference and the importance as well of each of the other. God, and which I love Bishop Johnny T. Robinson, sort of made the case that if you define God as ultimate reality, you can't really argue about the existence of God because by definition, God is ultimate reality. Okay? You can only argue about, well, what's ultimate reality like? And here's where my Christianity bails me out, because to understand what ultimate reality is about, okay, here's my faith commitment. You could either conclude that it's just sort of ever-expanding lower and lower levels of entropy or energy to which is our end, okay? Or you could argue that there's ultimate reality is very much there and is vindictive, nasty, mean, treat me like I deserve to be treated. Or you can kind of appreciate what most of the world's major religions try to do, and what I think our heritage does magnificently for me, but we're not all alone on that one, I don't think. But, God is like, ultimate reality is like something that matters ultimately, that really gives us meaning, that gives us purpose, that gives us values. And I don't know where she lives in atoms, but wherever she is, ultimate reality is kind of like all those stories that we've heard about like there's a virgin birth. My mother got very upset about the biology. Mom, I understand the virgin birth to be about something far more important than biology. And here's where I didn't articulate it very well in a quick comment or two. But, we get glimpses from our Christian heritage. But to me, the deepest glimpse of ultimate reality, I believe, is the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. That's to me. If ultimate reality is that kind of sympathy, empathy, that's huge. So anyway, that kind of gets us to, we're not talking about empathy. Show this picture of a little girl that was drew in our studies in Brazil. It was a very poignant personal experience to just sort of see her to herself without arms and to realize that she saw herself as this beautiful person that she aspires to being. But psychologist explaining who taught me how to do these psychological tests in the children in favela in Brazil that we were working, said, Dick, this going without arms signifies that she has no sense of empowerment to deal with her lot in life. And, whereas I tell that story with difficulty every time, I think that's glimpse. So what ultimate reality might be like. And that's powerful. That to me is more powerful than any other biblical message that I find that to be profound. Well, thinking about the importance of compassion as a potential evolutionary value, a survival of the fittest who's the fittest. I actually wrote that little book, Evolution of Evolution, the survival value of caring. Survival value. Wait a minute. The point is that evolution itself is evolving, is changing. So poor old Darwinian plodding natural selection has been eclipsed by what? Human behavior. Evolution itself is changing. In fact, human behavior and genes are interesting in terms of how that evolutionary value, survival value, is changing. For example, there are some genes that we now realize started off and evolved because they had evolutionary survival value. And yet, over time and change, they have become detrimental. Sickle cell trait. Why is that in the human gene pool? Because it was protective of malaria in the malaria endemic areas that were the highest. And so a child who has cerebral malaria is less likely to die if they have sickle cell trait. And so that made having that trait an evolutionary survival value. If we can just finish getting rid of malaria, we're not there yet, but as we get malaria under control, sickle cell is just a horrific disease. There are genes. We even are one of our more interesting discoveries in science and studying the children in Brazil. We found that all of the abject poverty and poor sanitation, repeated gut infections, which is my area, disgusting as it is, it actually had an influence on not only the children's growth and development, but their cognitive function. And so that picture from the little girl when she was 9 years old, and we went back and she had been in our studies the first 2 years of her life, and she had a lot of problems. And now that outcome of this beautiful person that she aspires to be without having arms and any sense of empowerment was very much like some of the higher executive functional deficits that the Alzheimer patients. And so we actually looked at the ApoE4 gene, the one that's the greatest risk for Alzheimer's disease in those kids, expecting that it would be what? They would be worse off if they had this gene, because it's fairly prevalent, 10% of the population. Actually, we did find the gene. It was a little higher than expected, 11%. But the kids that had that E4 gene had better cognition. We were 180 degrees wrong. That's why I love science. You have a hypothesis, and not only were you wrong, but you were wrong by 180 degrees. It was beneficial. And now I stopped and went back to think, this gene that carries a bunch of phospholipids to our brain is really a terrible problem for all of us all overeating, lazy people. But if you're a child hanging on by his fingernails nutritionally, and then you get all this gut infection and you're losing weight, that gene actually is a survival value. And every one of our ancestors, if you go back just 2 or 3 generations, grandparents or great-grandparents, I have to start saying now, you go to any family graveyard, wherever we're from, and you'll find graves of 2-year-olds that died of typhoid fever. All of our ancestors weathered those storms, even the wealthy, because there was water and sanitation lacking up until the mid-18th century, cholera outbreak in London. And so our gene pool has been under pressure by all of those problems for all that time. And yet, if we can just have a decent diet and decent water and sanitation, this gene is just a horrific disease. But if you're a child and have that same Alzheimer-like deficit, we did the testing of semantic and phonetic fluency. And one of those, the semantic fluency, is the one that tests higher executive function. You ask a child for phonetic fluency, how many words can you say in a minute that begin with an S or an F or a consonant sound? And luckily it works in Portuguese as well as it does in English. And they would name, sun, stars, sequence, etc. And then you asked for semantic fluency, you're asked, how many fruits or animals can you name? Now, let alone that the Brazilian children knew more fruits and animals, but that is the semantic fluency, which is the deficit that an Alzheimer patient first kind of begins to get, meaning that you have to retrieve, I think of it simplistically, as you'd have to retrieve from a different brain region what an animal or fruit is, and then you have to name some, okay? So it makes kind of sense, and the semantic fluency was the thing that was hit the hardest in those kids. And so my mother had been quite an accomplished pianist, played completely by ear, and she was up here in West Salem in the Alzheimer unit after a while. And my father and we would be visiting her and walking down the hall with my father in one arm and I was on the other. She turned to me and said, you remind me of my son, Dick. And I said, Mom, it's probably because I am your son, Dick. Well, the nurse was crying. But we would take her to the piano bench in the lobby, and she would look at it like it was sort of strange. What is this? And my father started humming Stardust. And all of a sudden, she broke into what could have been a concert on the stage, all up and down the keyboard, magnificent, playing Stardust. And what for an elderly lady is kind of a sad story, for a child is horrific for a lifetime. And so now you know why I did what I did for a lifetime, working on that problem itself. Yeah, if we talk about the evolution of traits that were once advantageous are no longer advantageous or even deleterious. What about aggressive behavior? Whatever the collective genes that define that, was once an incredibly strong survival trait. You have to kill your food, you have to kill to keep from getting killed, you have to be aggressive. What about aggressive behavior today? I think it may be our worst enemy, the most likely to extinguish us. What about competition versus collaboration? Even in academics, there was go alone. And frankly, far better science occurs when you obey the African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so collaboration is far more powerful than just competition alone. There may be some role for that. I'm not trying to say there isn't. But there are evolving advantages that are different from the way they once were for a number of traits. I think I'll list 10 in one of these books, that potential traits that are changing over time. So it's kind of fun and interesting to think about those. But compassion is clearly a trait that I try to argue is the most important trait for human survival, at least any type of humanity that I care to be a part of, that is actually reached across a lot of disciplines. The Dalai Lama is pretty good on compassion. Gandhi was right impressive. My two greatest idols in my lifetime, Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela, moved mountains with compassion and forgiveness. There's a marvelous African concept of Ubuntu. Have you ever heard of that? Ubuntu is I am because of you. I am because of you. That, and my third example was Jesus wept. And, you know, uh, I don't think we have the only insights into compassion, but I do think that our Christian message is very strong and very illuminating on that survival value. And so I kind of wrote that book hoping to try to reach the rich and powerful who don't think they need to worry about any of these compassion things with square between the eyes. You don't get this. If you don't pay attention to this, you're hosed. You and we around you that don't get that are, the last figure, I think, is the plot of the extinction events in planetary history. Yes. And I spent a lot of time on those charts, but there were two major extinction events. One was with the asteroids and the dinosaurs, and then there was another one became like 90+% of all life got just wiped out. Whether you believe, that Jesus wept is really important or not, or whether you believe it in a different way through Ubuntu, if we get that, we have a shot at surviving. And here's where I love Teilhard de Chardin's Omega point. Okay, you can have faith in entropy, we're going to nowhere, or a vindictive God that's going to send me to hell because I'm so bad, or a God that weeps. And to have meaning, how can you be optimistic? I can't live any other way. The options are just are something that I can't cope with. So I have to believe in being a part of something that's bigger than just ourselves and that has meaning and hope. And in fact, I even wanted to get it put into, it's in one of those books, what I wrote to our granddaughter, our oldest granddaughter, child, when she was born. Everett Koop, who was a marvelous Surgeon General, I heard him give a talk one time that when you give a child a toothbrush around their 4th birthday, that's when you start teaching them how to respect themselves and other people. Well, I actually embellished that, and I got his permission before he died to put that into that evolution book. When you give a child a toothbrush, I wrote to our granddaughter, that's when you begin to ask the all-important questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What gives my life meaning? And when you begin to realize that you're an important part of something much bigger than just yourself. And I actually wanted to get that before the ACLU to teach in public schools, because thinking of ourselves as being a part of something bigger than just me is kind of an important need in the society at large. I know that the folks that go to church get that message a lot, but I actually worried about some of the folks that ain't going to church as much anymore, and how to reach those folks, which I think Second does better than most. And so that's what was behind some of that. But evolutionary survival, it's okay to care about surviving. If it's okay, maybe even if we can just redefine self, as all of the human family, then it's okay to be wanting self to survive. Because self is all of us together. But if self is just me and not you, or us and not them, we're hosed. We've had it. Self has to be the whole human family, loving enemies as well. There are a whole lot of things that have sort of gotten me into saying things like that. the tribe is Homo sapiens. That's kind of hard to call some of those characters brothers and sisters. Are you kidding me? That's the hard part. But it is imperative for survival, even. So I just want to throw on the top of all those other things. And we don't have forever to get it. Technology going the way it is, we can totally abolish Homo sapiens or the blue marble planet. And we're sort of nibbling at it pretty faster and faster. I'm afraid that's an changes over time, is the way I started that book. And it's kind of urgent. We don't have forever. I was driving down that road to Jericho. Have you ever driven down that road? It is the most desolate, horrible, dry place that I think I've ever seen. And to think of some guy on the side of the road over there, Palestinian too. This Jewish teacher was teaching about it, who our neighbor is, this Palestinian, Samaritans. I actually had to do some research. Samaria was just a little part of Palestine, but built. So that Jewish teacher who taught us that we needed to, that our best friend and neighbor is a Palestinian. Hello.
Racially different.
Rank up.
Religiously different. Other.
At times like this, we need to remember three things. And that is to have a dream, to start somewhere doing the doable, and I wanted to say, and hopefully live long enough, but that's not what matters. Persevere. Have a dream, do the doable, and persevere. Well, that sort of became our Center Global Health motto. And somebody put it on a sphere of the world. Have a dream, do the doable, and persevere. Our job is not to win the war, but to fight the right battles. And the war is in higher hands. Thank goodness. Thank God. And so more important than living long enough is to just persevere and hope for the best.